So Patrick, I understand that you're starting to scale your team globally as well across Argentina and Kazakhstan. Any specific examples of like how you've been more thoughtful with like connecting with the Argentina-based teammates versus what you've done with a US-based direct report?
The day in, day out communication about the work, I realized that I was just terrible when it came to Slack. Like I kind of had relied on the context of working together in person. And then in Slack, I'm someone who types really fast, multiple messages, no punctuation. I use a lot of loose terms. And in a remote context, that can be really bad. There's been a lot about how I communicate, and I think the main thing I am finding is it has to just be way more deliberate.
I've certainly learned my lesson as well with direct American Slack messages. I now, over-index on voice notes and just letting them hear my intonation of my voice. That, it's not a, hair on fire concern. This is just something I wanted, like a little feedback I wanted to address or whatever it may be. Patrick, welcome to Founders and Empanadas. Really excited to have you on today.
Thank you for having me on, Josh. I'm excited, and I'm excited to eat some empanadas here.
Yeah, let's crack into them. Let's see what flavor you got today.
That was beef.
Beef? Okay. I think my VA got you like a Hawaiian surprise for the second one, so get ready for that.
Okay.
Hope you like Hawaiian pizza. But Patrick, really excited to have you on today. We'll really be covering a lot of topics, but I'm particularly interested in diving into the impact of AI on software. And I'd love to kick things off by you just sharing a little more about how you founded UserHub and what pain points you identified that you wanted to solve with your product.
Yeah, sure. So UserHub, we are a monetization platform that allows software businesses to manage their users and pricing in one spot. It's somewhat analogous to Shopify. Like Shopify allows e-commerce companies to embed checkout onto their website to optimize the digital purchase path, manage their product inventory. UserHub has a similar value proposition for software businesses. We allow them to model out their pricing, ship a really highly performant purchase path, and give them the tools to iterate and experiment with their monetization model.
Excellent. Okay. And I'm curious, just hearing a little bit more about like what catalyzed your mission to really empower small software businesses and making just the pricing models a lot easier for them.
Yeah, so I think the origin story is that both me and my co-founder love small businesses. Like I just think small businesses are more fun than big businesses. I have nothing against big business. I think that they're totally necessary and they're net good for the world. But just at small businesses, there's less politics, there's less hierarchy, there's more context per head. I just think it's a better place to work. And I think if you look at our industry, if you look at the software industry, it's actually really hard to be a small software business. Like, yes, there are startups, and startups have a low head count, but it's a healthy startup ecosystem is different than a healthy, stable small business segment. Like startups tend to either graduate and become much bigger companies or they die, right? And so we want to build tools to help small software businesses and to help them compete and compete and have infrastructure and tooling that really rivals what you would get at like a really large company.
I love that. And I'm seeing more and more that tech is becoming less of a moat, and with very small consolidated teams, you can really develop robust platforms quickly with things like no-code tools coming out more and low-code. But yeah, definitely aligned with you there on being a lover myself of small businesses, and those are my favorite clients. Are the ones where you can get in deep with the founder and really make a big impact for them. Patrick, I'm curious, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the software industry beyond just like current consolidation trends? Are there any things you're seeing industry wide in 2025?
Yeah, I think that as you said, I think well there's AI and we could talk about that. But I think right now if you look at the software industry and to go back what you were saying about the fact that um software businesses might be at this point where they can get smaller and they might require less people. Um and hopefully we're entering into this the golden era for niche, smaller software businesses. But I think if you look still today, the software industry remains highly consolidated. Like it's actually still like we talk about it a lot, but it's still pretty inhospitable to small businesses. Um, like I sort of use two other industries that are both at extremes to talk about it. Like if you think about the airline industry. Like the airline industry is dominated by big businesses. It's very hard to be a small business in the airline industry. I think if you look at like there's census data that says like 90% of the industry payroll in airlines goes to big businesses, right? At the other side of the spectrum, you have something like the bar industry. And the bar industry is dominated by small businesses, right? It's um, it tends to be a very local business. People like local watering holes. There's not a lot of big businesses in bars, right? Like maybe Fox and the Hound, Dave and Buster's. So you have those two examples, right? Right now, the software industry is way more like airlines. In fact, it's very similar in terms of industry, like concentration statistics. And so, hopefully we'll see what happens. I mean, that's the whole question with AI. Is it going to be a boon for the incumbents, or maybe it'll help um, be something that will help create a small, healthy software business. But right now, it's very much the software industry is still very much dominated by big businesses.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And yeah, let's dive a bit into AI. So I'm curious with your business, how do you balance embracing AI while also protecting your core business model? And it's something that I'm thinking about a lot myself as well at New York.
Yeah, I think as a founder of a tech business, you sort of want to do two things. You want to obviously develop conviction about what you think the technology means for your business, but I also think you have to ignore a lot of the stuff that you see on LinkedIn and Twitter, right? Like I think as a founder, you want to see your space, your domain, your business with like as best you can 2020 vision. And I think if you spend a lot of time doom scrolling on LinkedIn, on Twitter, it's easy to get disoriented. It's easy to start to kind of join the herd and um, see things the wrong way. And I think like obviously there's all the people on LinkedIn who want to get eyeballs and are saying crazy stuff, but I think you even have to think about some of the incentives of some of the founders of these big tech companies, like even like Sam Altman at OpenAI. Like he's trying to get funding. He's trying to get customers. He has an incentive to say some hyperbolic things. I think the anecdote, in my opinion, is to um, well, one, obviously use the tools a lot yourself and see what they're good at, see what their limitations are. But then I also find it's really helpful to like listen to the researchers. To me, the researchers, the AI researchers, they're a little bit more like the CTOs where they're like less prone to saying crazy things. Um, and you can start to glean where they think the technology is going. Where do they think the limitations are? What do they think the opportunities are? And I think that you'll get a much more honest assessment from them than you would, maybe more of the business minded founder who is trying to get as many eyeballs as possible.
Totally. Yeah. Are there any researchers that you recommend or that you follow? Any kind of names you want to share with the audience?
I think the best podcast that I've seen for that is I think it's the Darkesh podcast, and he has on some of the researchers from the original, um, the Attention Is All You Need paper. He's had sort of all the big researchers on across all the big companies, and so listening to those, and they're long interviews too. So I found those to be helpful.
And for founders of these small software businesses that, especially on the application layer, that might be experiencing some anxiety or kind of are in that manic mode of trying to figure out AI, what are some kind of high level pieces of advice or maybe a new perspective you'd like to give them?
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar moment myself last year. Um, I was at the Stripe conference. Stripe, big fintech company. They have their conference. It's called Stripe Sessions. So I was at Stripe Sessions 2024, and I was sat at a panel, and there was a lot. The panelists were filled with like these engineering leaders from a bunch of like fancy companies, engineering leaders from Stripe, from Versal, from all these places, right? They're not just like some Joe Schmo, so to speak. And the moderator asked them, how many engineers will it take to recreate DocuSign in 2025, right? DocuSign is sort of being the stand-in for like a, a business software app that we all know. And they went around the panel, and the answers were anywhere from it'll take 1 engineer to 5 engineers. Like that was the range. 1 engineer to 5 engineers to recreate all of DocuSign in a year, right? DocuSign is an enterprise software business. They have a market cap of $20 billion-ish. I don't know. They have 10,000 employees. Many of those are software engineers, right? Thousands of those are software engineers. Obviously, they weren't talking about how many people would recreate to build the whole business, but to recreate how many engineers would it take to recreate the product. So again, these are credible people, and the implication of that, like if they all agreed on that, and like the implication of that is insane, right? That's obviously super deflationary for SaaS if you can build a whole product with a few people in a year's time that had previously taken thousands of software engineers. Well, we're now a year out from that, and you can't rebuild all of DocuSign with a few engineers, right? DocuSign presumably knows about AI. As far as like they still have thousands of engineers on staff, right? They're not down to a few people. So anyway, some of the rhetoric right now is really hyperbolic, and like it's tough because it's hard to know. There's where it is today and where it's going, but I think you have to I think you have to work really hard to not get caught up in the hype. I left that panel and I was like, I don't know what I should do. I just heard all these people with really fancy titles just say that the whole world was going to change. It didn't. Right? And I mean, it's not to say it won't be transformational, but like, you know, you really got to parse through what people are saying right now.
Absolutely, yeah. I've also had those same kind of scares and staying up at night thinking about my business. And I can share on New York's end, we're really trying to embrace AI assisted teammates, whether that's customer support, executive assistants, and higher level roles, but still having that human layer to catch the 5% of the time when the AI hallucinates and creates crazy shit, and just more efficient workflows, but not fully taking the human out of the loop.
Yeah, and I think that's like I think that like I don't mean to make it sound like I'm someone who's bearish on AI. Like I think AI can be massively impactful. The next big platform shift, however you want to style it, it can do all those things. It can quadruple the size of the software TAM, the next $10 trillion company, all of that. But it can still do all those things and still fall far short of super intelligence that obsoletes human intelligence. Humans have no comparative advantage. Widespread unemployment. Like there's a big range between those two things, right? So yeah, but I totally, yeah, I think AI, like so I talked a little bit about the moment where I was like, wow, the rhetoric was insane and it gave me pause. But I've also had moments where I'm like, wow, I've been really impressed. Like especially on some of the software engineering tasks, like I was playing with it and I was setting up an app, and I had ChatGPT help me set up login for the app. Like login's a very common task that you need if you're building software, right? You have to authenticate users. It's well known. The patterns are well established. And like as someone who's not a software engineer, it took me 2 seconds to set up login to roll my own. I didn't even use a third-party service. So I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I think it's going to be transformational. I also think that like some of the use cases you're mentioning of um, like customer service and some of these things, like I also think that there's this reality of like there's this demographic crisis in the world, and there's going to be, labor shortages. It's going to be hard to hire people, and like we almost need AI to work to fill some of those, right? um, so yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting next few years, and I'm definitely leaning more towards the spectrum of, will there'll still be some, human layer in the loop, at least for the foreseeable future. Once we get to the point where it's like, lawyers are fully replaced, then, well, as a society, we'll need to figure that out. But
Well, that's my thing. If we get to that point where we've created a machine god that's smarter than all of us, and I'll just go sit on a beach somewhere. I'll just go listen to DJ GPT. There'll be much bigger issues than what's happening with my software in the software industry and my startup in the world once that happens. Like, I guess I'll just go and enjoy my life at that point,
come on down to Colombia and eat some empanadas on the beach with me.
Yeah. There you go.
How's the empanadas coming along?
I'm good. I'm about halfway through the beef one, and I'm very happy with it.
Okay, get ready for the pineapple surprise. It's coming.
All right.
Awesome, Patrick. So I actually have quite an interest in historical entrepreneurs and kind of pulling from, how businesses were built 100 years ago and some of the parallels that you're seeing today. I'd love to hear kind of high level some of the insights that you've learned and how you've applied that to your current company at UserHub.
Yeah, I mean, I like history. My favorite thing to do is to watch a Ken Burns documentary. Um, so anyway, I at some point started reading about entrepreneurs who were working on founding companies, like, at the start of the 1900s. So I read a book, and I wrote a little article on it on Clarence Saunders. He was the founder of Piggly Wiggly. He basically came up with the first self-service grocery store in the 1910s. And everybody always says, oh, self-service grocery store, that was obvious. But it wasn't obvious then. There was no modern packaging. The way it looked before is you had to someone would walk into a store and there'd be a counter layout, and the clerk would bag, cut, slice everything. So Saunders had the idea of basically packaging everything up and putting it on a shelf. But the minimum MVP of the grocery store had like no meats, no nothing. Like you had to make a lot of trade-offs. So anyway, it's fun to read about some of these entrepreneurs and like what they were dealing with. I mean, one of the things that stands out is they're gifted storytellers. Like Saunders was really good at writing copy in local newspapers. Like he'd have these sort of really pithy one-liners of like the tyranny of local prices or the store that lets you help yourself. So he's very good at like coming up with a message and putting it in a newspaper. Like if he was alive today, he'd definitely be somebody who was millions of followers on Twitter and would be very good at working with memes, etc. But yeah, that gift for narrative, that gift for storytelling is definitely something that stands out.
Very cool. Are there any other like surprising parallels you found between those early 1900s founders and today's founders?
I guess I'll talk about one thing that's actually different is like when you read about some of these founders, like I'm reading this other one about the founders of the National Cash Register business. It was basically like the Stripe of the 1880s. Like it was the first great fintech company. You needed to have a a cash register because basically your clerks would steal from you. So you couldn't scale to multiple stores because you could only have someone behind the counter who you trusted, like a family member. Cash register is basically what made multi-store scale possible. So anyway, but one of the things that was different with some of these these entrepreneurs is like back then there was no like venture capital wasn't a thing. Financial markets weren't as mature. Risk capital just doesn't exist in the form it did today. So what you had to do to start a company, like a lot of times you were taking on debt with personal guarantees, which means if you lost, you're on the hook, right? Maybe you're dipping in your own savings. So when I read some of their stories, I'm kind of like, it's a miracle that any of these businesses got founded at all. It's a miracle that anybody was willing to take a risk at all, because the trade-offs back then were way more stark. It was a little bit more like almost like being an entrepreneur was a little bit more like it was like going on the Oregon Trail. Like it was just it was even harder than it was today, right? And so I think it's a good thing to live in a time where the barriers to entry to entrepreneurship are lower, and hopefully, we can continue to lower them. But so they had a iron stomach as far as risk taking, was concerned.
Well, the world certainly needs more entrepreneurs. And it's becoming easier than ever to start a business. It's awesome. Any other just like timeless principles that have emerged from reading about these historic founders?
I don't know that there's anything. I don't know if there's any others. I mean, those are the big two that stand out. I think it helps me. I think the other thing I like about it is like there's so much stuff there's a lot of management fads that circulate in tech, OKRs, whatever. And it's just nice to like get away from those and see kind of what is true and what worked across like a much in a different context.
Yeah, it's something that is pretty top of mind for me right now with hiring. Is just a lot of managers applying their frameworks that might have worked in a different industry or larger size company to like a smaller startup like ours, and just those fads, you put it well. It's at the end of the day, it's just a matter of like being focused on customer and outcomes and the team, and that's kind of the timeless guide to success.
Well, and I think that what you just said is, I think, the number one sin, the most common type of error people make when they come to startups is to do the thing that worked at the big company and apply that to the startup. And that can be dangerous.
Yeah, startup is chaos, and I've actually found that bringing in talent from Fortune 500 companies almost never ends up working out because they're just like fish out of water. Just it's a totally different perspective and skill set from what they've done throughout their careers.
Yeah, it's if you're coming from a big business like that, if you're coming from a big business, like they have something to defend. They have a core business. They have a brand. Startup is no defense, all offense. The null hypothesis with your startup is it's going to die. And unless you do something to make it a thing, right? And so it's very, very different than working at a big company, obviously.
Yeah. Awesome, Patrick. Try out the, let's see how empanada number 2 is on your end. Different?
Different. This one's got a lot more going on.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So, Patrick, I understand that you're starting to scale your team globally as well across Argentina and Kazakhstan. And I'd love to hear a little more about different cultural dynamics that might have surprised you as you've started to scale your team beyond just New York.
Yeah, and this is a place where I worked in a startup before this. We were all co-located in New York. Obviously, we went remote during COVID, but very different to be a company who had everybody in the office and then go remote than it is to be a remote first company. So I say that all to say I don't have all the answers, but I think some of the things that are interesting are we've now that we've started to hire globally, depending on what countries you're hiring in, there's less cultural overlap or connective tissue. We had somebody working in Kazakhstan, and you'd come on and say, "Did you see Dune? Did you watch the latest episode of this or that? Did you see Severance? Whatever." Um, and they hadn't. They there's totally different set of things going on, and there. And I'm not generalizing about all of the people in This was just the particular person I was working with. So I think it's been. I think you have to be more creative and more thoughtful and more deliberate with how you find a way to connect with people. I found online board games to be a good thing. It gets everybody, we learn the same rules of the board game and we get to play. And um so but yeah, it's interesting. I'm at square one of thinking about this, and there's definitely challenges that I hadn't even considered as we've started to hire more internationally.
Nothing better than a group Settlers of Catan game.
That's what we do. Settlers of Catan. So
It's often the most like empathetic teammates end up being the backstabbers in Catan with their their rubbers.
it's true. It's true.
And any specific examples of like how you've been more thoughtful with connecting with the Argentina-based teammates versus what you've done with a US-based direct report?
Yeah, I think there's that whole issue of sort of building personal connective tissue and trying to develop a personal relationship. And then I think as far as just the day in, day out communication about the work, I realized that I was just terrible when it came to Slack. Like I kind of had relied on the context of working together in person. And then in Slack, I'm someone who types really fast, multiple messages, no punctuation. I use a lot of loose terms, and in a remote context, that can be really bad. So I've had to really tighten up my communication, and even just things like how we organize a Figma file, right? Like there's sort of a UX there of how the Figma file is organized. Of if someone gets dropped into the Figma file and they need to orient themselves, like making it so you can look at the file and understand what's the latest thinking and grok it really quickly because you haven't been sitting next to someone in person. So um, there's been a lot about how I communicate, and I think the main thing I am finding is it has to just be way more deliberate.
Yeah. I've certainly learned my lesson as well with direct American Slack messages. And I now, over-index on voice notes and just letting them hear my intonation or my voice. That, it's not a, hair on fire concern. This is just something I wanted, like a little feedback I wanted to address or whatever it may be.
So you do those in Slack. You do like voice notes in Slack.
Yeah, yes. Voice Assistant Slack. We actually also started this virtual office. It's called Frame, but kind of being able to recreate just the water cooler chat of like, you're walking towards the meeting room and being able to interact with someone that you don't usually see or interact with normally. That's helped a lot with just like building a level of trust and rapport across the organization.
Huh. So it's just like a 2D office that you can kind of, if you get near somebody, you can talk to them.
Yeah, it's 3D. It looks like Sims, like circa early 2000s. But instead of like torturing your sim and not letting them go to the bathroom, it's going walking throughout your office, and instead of meetings on Google Meet links, we have them in actual dedicated rooms throughout the office.
Huh.
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty fun. Check it out. You can also do
It almost reminds me of like a video game, like an MMORPG. Like like you're saying with Sims. Okay. All right. I'll have to check that out.
awesome, Patrick. Um, I'm also curious, just how you've been able to like maintain cohesion with your team across different time zones and maybe different life stages that they're in as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you obviously start to realize the value of time zones to some extent. Like if we hired somebody in Buenos Aires, that's more or less the same time zone as very close, similar time zone to the Eastern time zone here, here in New York. Whereas if you go to Kazakhstan, it's basically entirely flipped, and you're relying a lot more on asynchronous communication. And so I think then you're relying a lot more on communication outside of Slack. Like it's through Linear, it's through Figma, it's through the pull request on GitHub. And there's sort of it's kind of more like communication through artifact than it is like direct communication. The parent, like the life stage in terms of hiring parents versus not parents is interesting. I think I went into the startup thinking that startups were a young person's game. And the now that I am a parent too, I sort of realize like parents have to kind of work along a different rhythm, End of day, 5 o'clock, you got to take care of the kids. You're responsible for the kids in the morning, getting them to school, getting them to wherever. So I think I'm more comfortable with the idea of like sort of parents who kind of work in windows and like, yeah, they log off at 5, but that's kind of what it takes to have kids. And they're also way more efficient, I think, because they just have less time. They have to be more efficient.
Yeah. Well, anecdote, my all my best teammates happen to be single moms. Just like the ultimates in efficiency and responsibility and reliability. Those have always been my best hires.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I've seen like my wife has just gotten, obviously she's a parent now too, alongside me. She's gotten way more efficient with work because it's just, you have these windows you can work in because you want to be able to spend time with your kids. So, and I also think there's part of it too is like it's getting like millennials were this huge wave demographically speaking, and millennials had kids later, but millennials are all now starting to, do all the things that the other generations are doing. And so um, you know, parents are becoming more common amongst millennials.
Absolutely. Yep. Perfect, Patrick. Are there any books you're reading that you'd like to recommend to the audience?
I am reading. I don't know. I'm reading a lot of books. I don't know if I like this book yet, but I'm reading a book called Believe. It's a book that tries to make the case for religion. It just came out, and not like a soft type of religion of like believe in, one of the big religious doctrines as like the stories have value, but like actually like believing in like a God. And I don't know, I'm agnostic, but I just want to hear somebody make the case in in 2025 for what that would look like. There's this whole thing on the finely tuned universe, and he goes through all of that. So anyway, I don't know if I like it yet, but it is what I'm reading.
Awesome. And Patrick, last question for you. This is something I like to ask everyone, but what's one strongly held belief that you have that you think 90% of other founders would disagree with?
I think that most founders, I think that one of the biggest things that a founder has to deal with, particularly early on, is this idea of status limbo. I think a lot of founders don't want to admit how much value they assign to status. From everything that I've read, we're kind of hardwired to understand social ranking and pay attention to it. Some people more so, less than others. And I think that when you found a company, there's this, I've heard the term I've heard referred to, I think is really good is status limbo. Like a lot of founders before they started the company maybe had climbed the career ladder, maybe they were managing a huge team. Maybe they were working on a product used by thousands of people. Maybe they had a really nice office. Maybe their salary was really high. And then you start a company and you go back to zero. And now you're in status limbo. You're working out of maybe a crappy office. There's only a few employees. You have no brand, no customers. And so the state of being in status limbo is really uncomfortable. And I think a lot of founders, what they end up doing consequently is maybe they try and spend money too fast because they were trying to recreate some level of organizational scale where they're like, I'm the manager, right? Or they're trying to invest in their brand ahead of where the product is, right? So I think that one of the things, the battles, it's obviously not a it's not going to make you successful, but it's going to increase your shot is if you're more comfortable in this state of status limbo, then you might be willing to persist longer rather than other people who may make a bad decision. And I think that's why, like, in the past, the people who started companies were like the weirdos, the romantics, the pirates, the people who sort of were less interested in playing status games.
Interesting take. Yeah. I, I see that a lot too of like founder friends that are over investing in like a huge expensive rebrand for the company before Series A. It's like, this is definitely not the area to put your limited funds. But
Yep.
awesome, Patrick. And where can people find out more about your company, UserHub, and where can they find you online?
Yeah, UserHub, just userhub.com. I am, I guess, most active on LinkedIn. So just Patrick Rafferty on LinkedIn.
Perfect. All right, Patrick, thank you so much for coming on and enjoying some empanadas with me.
Thank you, Joshua. Appreciate it. Empanadas were great, and thank you for having me on.
Amazing. Cheers.